So let's talk about the other things that we kind of had as some goals. Well, for one thing, you'll notice that this picture right here has a drop shadow. It also appears to have sort of like a border. One of the things that you are going to be able to do, even if you don't have a circular image, you can still put a circular radius around it if you want. Okay, I'm going to show you how to do that, talk about drop shadows, about text shadows. So let's jump over here and let's take a look at how we can do that. I'm going to get back into the elements section. And I'm going to go ahead and choose this image. And you see the properties that are over here that we've already got assigned, and it's based on the width and so forth. Now, if we want to add some sort of drop shadow using CSS, I want to show you there's a property called BoxShadow that we can use. And it allows you to add shadows to elements that are non-text elements. So anything that occupies a space, a rendered space, like, you know, an article or a paragraph or an image, something like that. They don't have to be block level elements. Just the point is it's not specifically text. And this page is the CSS Tricks website. And again, if you were to just do a search for box shadow, then you would be able to find this page. And he actually gives you a lot of interesting information. I'm going to show you just, mainly how you can type this, but at the same time, if you want to be sure that all browsers would be supported for the stuff that you're doing, including legacy browsers, you could use all of these different rules. And it explains out here in the comments what those other things cover. So it talks about how it works with Safari versions 3 to 4, Firefox 3.5 to 3.6. Those are some really old versions, and so forth. That's going to help you do a progressive enhancement thing. Right now, BoxShadow just by itself is going to cover an awful lot of stuff. So we could copy all of this, but right now I'm just going to show you how to type BoxShadow. But what you would want to do is go back and copy these vendor specific, that's what they're referred to as vendor specific rules. If you ever see this thing that's -webkit box shadow or whatever, or -moz for Mozilla, those are vendor specific for older browsers. So, but anyway, this tells you the particular relationship of all of the value positions. So you'll see here we've got under box shadow, we have 3 pixels, 3 pixels, 5 pixels, 6 pixels, and then a color. And then he explains here what this is doing. The horizontal offset is the first position, the vertical offset is the second position, the blur radius, so to tell how much it's blurred, and then the optional spread. So like if you've ever used Photoshop, you know that there's a blur and there's a spread. There's also a distance. The distance is kind of like what the offset is, how far away and in what direction, on which axes. Is the shadow supposed to be? How much is it supposed to be blurred? How far is the spread supposed to go? And then what is the color? Okay, and then he explains all that stuff here. So you can always come back here and read it. You can also use, instead of using just a flat hexadecimal number, it also tells you that you can use what's referred to as RGBA, and we're going to get into that. RGB is red, green, blue. A means alpha. Alpha is a transparency layer, okay? And so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go over here, and I'm just going to go ahead and create a drop shadow rule for this image. So we're going to start off by saying box shadow. And right now, I'm not going to do all the vendor specific stuff because I want to keep this pretty simple. So the very first offset was the horizontal offset, and so I want it to be like a 90-degree, and this if you want to think about the direction of the light source, it'd be like a 90-degree offset so that the light is coming directly straight down so that it doesn't skew to the left or to the right, okay? So I like typically to make my light source drop shadows if I'm using them so that they are coming straight down or dead, dead head on. I'll go ahead and give it an offset. So 0 doesn't need any kind of unit of measure because 0 is 0. All right, and so then the next one is going to be the other offset, the vertical offset. So I will make that, let's do 2 pixels, for instance. I'm So you can see it's starting to do something kind of strange over here, right? And then the next thing is going to be the blur radius. So I'll say let's do something like, I don't know, 10 pixels so that it's big and blurred. And you can see what's happening is it's finding the edges of my square picture, okay? And that's okay. I'm going to show you a way to deal with that, because also this is probably what's happening on your image if, well, it's going to be happening on your image, but especially, you know, if you don't have a circular image, maybe this is the way it's supposed to look and you want it to look that way. So that's the blur radius, and then we want the spread. So let's just say it's like a 2-pixel spread, so that it spreads out a little bit more. And finally, we need to tell it what color to be. Right now, it's just choosing white because, and the reason it's choosing white by default is because we have the text color for this banner set to white. And because images are inline elements, it's going to automatically try to use white for the shadow, okay? Even though images aren't text, they're still inline. So instead, I could do something like pound 000 for black. Well, that's really, really heavy, and it's very sharp and harsh. I think that's a little bit much. What I want to do is a level of transparency. So I can type RGBA and then 2 parentheses, okay, and then I have to arrow back inside of my parentheses. And RGBA, red, green, blue, alpha, that means there are going to be 4 distinct values inside of these parentheses, 1 for red, 1 for green, 1 for blue, and 1 for the alpha transparency. So if I want to base it off of black, but make it sort of like a shade of black, you know, like a level of transparency, then I need to give the values of black. If you think about what black is, it's 000 for red, green, and blue, because it's allowing 0 light for red, 0 light for green, and 0 light for blue channels. I can do 0, 0, 0, and now is my alpha channel. So I could say 1 if I want it to be 100%, and I don't because that's too strong. If I want it to be, let's say 0.5%, that's 50%, so that might be okay. All right, but now we still are left, I can hit enter. Now we're still left with the problem, though, that it's not around the circle. Okay, well, there's this other thing that we can use that's called a border radius. I'm going to jump over again to CSS Tricks. And again, you could be at css-tricks.com and do a search and find this page for border radius. But I'm going to explain to you how border radius works. And essentially, you've got 4 corners of a square or of an element or a rectangle or something. All right. And what it's going to tell it to do is to give it a radius. All right. So, or a curve based off of a circle. Because if you think about a circle, the geometry of it is that it has 4 quadrants. It has 4 corners that have been rounded off. All right. And so you can look at this and get an idea. This is pixel based if you wanted to look at that. But because we are scaling an image, we do not want to tell it to be based in pixels, because depending on how big that image is, pixels, you know, in a border radius, those aren't going to change, but the actual image size will, and so the radius isn't going to always match the picture. So if I'm scaling the picture in percentages, then I also need to have my border radius in a percentage. And so if we take a look at this, you can see that there are some different ways of doing a border radius, and it's very similar to the way I showed you, you know, how to do margin, in that you've got 4 positions. If you wanted to do, you know, your shorthand, you've got if I just said 20 pixels in this example he's got on the screen, it's 20 pixels all the way around for all 4 corners, right? If I just put the one value. But if I wanted to have a different radius for different corners, then I could do something like this. And he explains right here, in this example, it is going to start top left, okay? So, and then it goes clockwise. So it's top left, top right, and then bottom left. And that's the order if you wanted to make something that's sort of leaf shaped, for instance. So you could have a square picture and you could make it so that it's kind of leaf shaped if you want. All right, so here's some examples. But I'm going to go over here, and instead of using pixels, I am going to use a percentage. So I'm going to add a new rule called border radius. Oops, there we go. Border radius. Okay, and I want it to be the same all the way around, and so I'm going to try something like 50%. And if you think about it, 50% is going to be the perfect dimension for a circle that's always going to be based off of a perfect square. Because if you want it to cut itself in each corner 50% for the radius, that's going to make it, each corner is going to be a perfect half of its square, and so it's going to create a perfect circle. So if you wanted to create a perfect circle, you would use a border radius of 50%. Of course, it has to be based on something that is a perfect square. So now you see what it's doing here. It's kind of showing me this orange outline. Well, what that is that it's actually showing a little bit of the background behind the image. Now, the image itself doesn't have a background color. That's not what's happening. I mean, when I say the image itself, I mean the actual PNG file does not have an orange background. What's happening is that the element of IMG, because I do not have it set to be a block level element, it does by default show a little bit, a few pixels. Usually it'll show it below it, okay? But because I've done this radius on it, now it's showing it all the way around. And it's actually showing a background that is transparent, and we see through it to the orange background. So if we wanted to give this IMG tag a background color of white, it would look like a nice white stroke. So I can say background, and in this case I could say background color, because I'm not expecting to do anything else to the background, so I'll use longhand, that's fine. And I'm going to tell it to be white, like that. And so now I've got this nice stroke. It's not really a stroke, but it looks like a stroke around the image, and I've got a drop shadow, and so it looks like this little button or a badge that's kind of hovering over the page. That's pretty cool, right? And if I want to go ahead and use that same drop shadow, that box shadow, I'm not going to mess with the border radius. I can copy this rule straight from here, so I just copied it like this, and maybe I want to have a slight shadow underneath this banner. So if I go to the banner, I can go ahead and add that rule there as well, and you see I've got a nice shadow there, and I probably want to do it around my articles. So if I select article, oh, and you see what it's doing, it's grabbing the article based on the user agent style sheet. I don't want to put it there. What I actually want to do is go and select one of the articles that's down inside of section content, because I gave that a really specific legacy rule or descendant rule like that, okay? So anyway, I can go ahead and I can add that box shadow there as well, and then I can also add it down here on the footer so that I again have a shadow so that everything feels consistent, like it's all sort of floating above the page a little bit. Okay, and I'll paste that there, and then you see I've got my shadow. All right, and so now I've got a lot of stuff that's got this kind of cool shadow applied to it. And before I go any further, so that I don't accidentally refresh this page or lose my styles, I'm going to jump over here to sources. I'm going to select all of it, copy it, and then I'm going to go back into my style sheet in Komodo edit, select all, paste, save. Okay, I'm doing this all with keyboard commands. And then now I can come back here and I can hit refresh, and everything should look the same, and I don't have to worry about losing those styles that I just created. So now I've got my shadows. In the next demonstration, I'm going to show you how you can basically come and add like a border on some of these things to kind of mimic the border that's here, so we have some consistency design-wise, as well as adding some text shadows in some places that make a lot of sense.